We're at the end of a kind of 4-year cycle. I don't know whether it's worth me just highlighting a few key changes, achievements over the last 4 years. I suppose for children's social care, you have scrutinised the budget last week. You have scrutinised it over the last 4 years. We are all clear about the growing and increasing pressures on the children's services budget, but despite that, we should be very proud that our children's services were rated good last March, with an outstanding judgment for our adoption services. So much to be proud of it in really difficult circumstances. And we know that residents consistently tell us that children's services, services for vulnerable children are a real priority for them. So what we have done to protect those services of the last 4 years is something I think we should be rightly proud of. I know that you are doing a knife crime scrutiny at some point, and I think we all acknowledge that there is a real challenge there, but I'm happy to talk about as best I can the knife crime action plan, the multi-agency one, although it might be something that presumably you will have Councillor Hargrove come and speak to you about as part of your scrutiny work. But I certainly think, looking forward to the next 4 years, that should be a top priority for the council and the agencies that we're working with on that. School places, I guess I will take us back 8 years to the school places crisis that we inherited from the Tory and Lib Dem administration then. But actually, we have spent in the region of £200 million since then investing in our expansion programme, and it means that actually this year at primary level, just under 90% of families receive an offer at their first preference school. I'm trying to think, I think we had 57 families who were left without any of their preferences, but they were all placed at local schools. But actually, if you go back to 2009, that was 474 families who were left without a preference of any of their preferences. So I think, again, much progress has been made so that children can get places in local schools, they can get a school of their choice. And also we have some amazing kind of learning and play facilities now across the borough that we should be rightly proud of. At secondary, I'm happy to talk a little bit about the work that we've done to support the new secondary school in East Dulwich and the Haberdashers Borough Academy, which received planning permission last week. In terms of school standards and assessments, the journey that we've been on is one that in 2010 around 60% of our schools were good or outstanding in the view of Ofsted. Now that's around 90%. And in terms of kind of assessment, whether that's Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, GCSE or A levels, I'm happy to take specific questions on that. But again, we have seen massive transformation in our schools across the last kind of 10 to 15 years. And we now see schools where at every level of assessment we're consistently ahead of the kind of national averages. In some areas we are definitely ahead of the London averages. In other areas we are just below. But I think our challenge, our aim is to be ahead of kind of national average, London average at every level of assessment. And I think that's the right challenge that we set ourselves. So I've kind of rattled through a bit, and they're all the good things, but I suppose your challenge to me will be to ask the more difficult questions, and we will do our best to answer them.
Thank you very much. Did you have anything to add, Nina or David?
I'd say that was a very brief summary of some of the key successes, and I'm particularly proud of the achievement, trend of achievement, the rising trend. And it's in some ways it's easier to improve achievement. In other ways it's harder to maintain it, and we've done that here. We're still going from strength to strength incrementally, because when you're in the top quartile there's not that much further to go, but we haven't taken our eyes off that, and we're consistently above the national averages, as you pointed out. So and that's the right ambition that we have, that we want to be the best in London. So we're leaving the national averages behind. I'm really pleased with the investment that we've had in our schools, particularly our primary schools, a huge investment. So we've got up to a dozen or so schools that have either been rebuilt or expanded, and we've both been to visit all of those schools, and they are stunning and have made a really, really massive difference to children's sense of worth, I think, and that does help with their achievement. And in this very, very difficult climate, and we've not mentioned this, where recruitment, where finances, school finances are difficult, it's difficult to recruit teachers. I think what we're doing here is helping as much as we can to attract teachers to a great school in a great borough. So I think, Vicky, you've touched on some of the key things around schools. I'm particularly pleased with, along with achievement, you can't have achievement unless those children are in school. So our attendance rates are high, our exclusion rates are low, but I agree with you. I think going forward the biggest challenge for us is around the knife-related difficulties that we're having, and we do need to have a very cohesive and coordinated approach to that, which I think we can get across the council that's actually working with across London as well.
Okay.
So,
do you have anything to?
Yeah,
you have your 2 pennies worth.
I might as well. I think these are extremely difficult and challenging times for many children and many families, and we are seeing a manifestation of pressure on families, pressure on children play out in their daily lives in school, and play out in the kind of crisis and tragedy and sadness that we often see. I am very proud of our workforce across social care and education. We have some of the most committed, passionate, compassionate, professional folk I've ever had the pleasure to work with and to lead. And in Southwark we seem to be able to recruit and retain those folk. We have many, many, many folk working in our services who've been here a long time, a really long time. That is not the norm in London. I will go and speak to people who've been here 15 years, 20 years. The average lifespan of a children's social worker today is 7 years before they leave the profession, because it's just such a tough job, and because of the lack of support really by wider society of the work that they do on our behalf, and the criticism and the hardship that they face in that work. So it's extremely tough times to be working in social care and education. It's extremely tough times financially, and yet despite that context, we seem to be able to reconnect day in, day out with the immense potential of young people and families in this borough, which is simply stunning. There's great work happening in schools, great work happening in social care, but you can only work with what you've got. And at the heart of that is a truth about Southwark and its communities, that actually there's immense potential here, and it is so fulfilling to see that realised. Looking forward, things still look very tough, but I think what I would call out, to add to Councillor Mills' a moment ago, is that the challenge that we are set by our lead member and by the administration, I genuinely believe has built the resilience in our services and has kept our aspirations very, very high. We do not sit on our laurels thinking we've got a good Ofsted inspection, therefore everything is fine. We are not fully content with the outcomes on every measure. So we work really hard, and it could be easy to lose sight and lose focus, but from lead member and from the administration, and indeed from scrutiny, all those elements were picked up in the Ofsted inspection as key enablers for us to keep going forward and keeping our aspirations high. And sometimes that can feel a bit rough, it's grit in the oyster, isn't it? But it's so important for keeping it real. And I'm really pleased with the skillfulness of that, because it does keep our folk motivated. It does keep us working for ever better outcomes for children and families in this borough. And I think it's very powerful. So I want to kind of acknowledge that wider leadership and support, which I really think has added immense value to the service, and to thank this committee as well for the scrutiny that it's brought, and partners around the table at Safeguarding Forum, because I know all that in the round is contributing to the outcomes that we're achieving, be it in the schools or social care. So I really want to acknowledge that wider contribution and thank colleagues for it.
Well, thank you all really for that, because it does feel that it is a summary and an appraisal of the last 4 years. And interestingly enough, I mean, Julie and I have been on this committee for the last 4 years. You've been in your position for the last 4 years, and you two have been here for a very long time. So the thing is, you know, that we can actually say that we have been, you know, and I'm really pleased that you said that Scrutiny has contributed as well, you know, to the leadership. So in one sense, we should be cracking the champagne because it's nearly the end of the 4-year term. But what we could do is use the rest of the session to look at what the challenge is, or try and head off. I mean, we've got scrutiny, and obviously, you know, we know what some of the pressure points might be. So it might be a good time to look at those and try and head them off at the pass. But, you know, I'm not wanting to make the meeting flat after those wonderful introductions, and I want you to know that I'm very, very proud, you know, of the Ofsted. I mean, it's just amazing, really. I'm proud of Southwark and everyone here, and, you know, I'm delighted that you're at the helm. But on that note, let's look for the knottier issues. I'm sure we have some. So I could go, or does anyone else want to go first?
I have 4 questions.
4 questions?
You want me to take them?
4, 1 for each year. Excellent. Go ahead.
You mentioned, you know, about teacher recruitment. How bad is it going to get, and how are we, not as a nation, or London in particular, going to overcome this problem? Because I believe it's not just about money now, it's about job satisfaction and the work they have to do. And there's probably not an easy answer.
Well, no one's found the answer yet. I can say that. And the answer will vary depending on who you ask. So, you know, we're hearing time and time again that at a national level we're being told by department that there is no crisis, that there are plenty of teachers to go around. Nationally, strategy-wise, there are different initiatives that are being trialled about getting people into teaching, but that's not necessarily filtering in across the board at a local level. So we have to look locally as well in terms of how we support our schools, how we can work with our schools in helping them to develop an interest in getting people into teaching and then keeping people in teaching. So we have our own local initiatives. So we do things like foundation degrees for staff who might be working in schools, but in a support capacity, to enable them to get a foot onto the ladder into teaching. So we're constantly looking for routes into teaching. We've developed some of our own routes into teaching, but we need to be more coordinated with other parts of the council as well, in terms of, you know, we know that housing is a big issue, so we need to have a coordinated and transparent and communicated plan around what we're doing there.
But there is, you know, this consultation, is it on at the moment, or is it right on the intermediate housing list?
Yes.
And on the private rented sector as well?
So that is being worked on, and that's where we're aiming to get that communicated when that's been consulted on. But so there are things that we can do internally.
The DfE aren't really taking this on board nationally, because you say they don't think there's a good...
Well, there's not a national programme that's aimed at impacting on every school. So there are programmes at national level which are directed at certain parts of the country, or certain types of areas, or certain types of schools. So it's not a blanket approach, because officially there isn't a crisis.
Okay. Did you have one question?
I've got more. Do you want to...
I just wanted to ask one quick follow-up, well, clarification, I guess, on that specific issue, if that's okay. It's just, I wondered, with obviously the rollout of academies and preschools, are you as a department even able to quantify how many kind of teaching vacancies there are in the borough at the moment?
That would be very
not
difficult
possible
because of exactly what you've described there. But what I do know is that we have a number of very large multi-academy trust schools in the borough, and I know that each of those trusts have their own programmes to attract and develop and progress staff in their schools. So, you know, they're in the same situation as everybody else, and they're trying the same strategies and approaches to varying degrees of success as is everybody else.
The only difference is, of course, with trust academies, they can employ non-qualified NQTs.
They can, yes.
You know, which is a difference. I know schools are doing that.
Yes.
The second question is really about secondary. Obviously, we don't have any secondary schools in the borough at all. The last, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, we had Harrison, and
oh gosh, yes, I remember.
we weren't really that happy. And then there was the issue about Southwark College and working with Newcastle and all that sort of area. What input do you have on secondary and further education now? Is there very much input?
You mean in terms of what's going on in the secondary? Yeah, I mean, I think with the majority of our secondary schools, whether they're standalone or faith schools or whether they're part of multi-academy trusts, I think there is a relationship, and I think there's scrutiny and there's challenge. And that's, you know, and I'm sure they have challenges of us too. I think that there are some exceptions to that, and I think that's a shame. But actually, I'd say overall, I think we have some really, really good, strong relationships. I think there's definitely scope for, you know, more scrutiny of those schools, so that they're truly accountable to the families that are there and the communities that are there. I mean, I'm just thinking.
Well, I mean, I would agree with you that there are varying degrees of involvement with the range of secondary schools. We have some involvement with all of them. We certainly have a duty around safeguarding. Yeah. Some of those secondary schools choose to buy into our early help services, so we have a very close contact there with how they're working with families. So, yes, I mean, it does vary. I wouldn't say sitting here now, you mentioned Harris, we have a number of Harris schools, and we have a different relationship with each of them. With each of them, yes, with some of them it's more involved than with others of them, so I wouldn't...
How about the Southwark College, because we had them in a couple of years ago. Do you have any input into that?
Well, we have Council City is a governor on their board, and there's been a whole range of kind of different kind of strategic bits of working with them. I mean, you're probably best asking Johnson about that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, but I
could add something to that in that yes, Councillor Situ is a member of the board there, and even since the partnership, or maybe more so since the partnership with Newcastle, we have a good relationship with leaders at Lewisham Southwark College. We've had several meetings where we've shared information about the improvements that they're making in terms of learner outcomes. So it's certainly not a relationship that's diminishing. If anything, we've had a very good relationship with them in recent times.
With the change of leadership, it might be a good time for the committee to, well, it's probably after May now, to call them in. I think that would be a good thing to do.
Board,
to be clear what they want to do going forward and why they've made those decisions. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin.
Third one, improvement. School improvement. I know it's been taken away.
Sorry, can I just step back very, very quickly to the academy issue? Because I mean, you've got the Regional Schools Commissioner coming in, and I think that the challenge that we have, and well, it's a good challenge to have, is that very broadly, all of our secondary schools perform well. There is definitely a difference. There are some that are doing very, very well, and there are some that I think could absolutely be doing better. The challenge for us, that if you compare us against other bits of the country and other academies, we're probably doing too well for the Regional Schools Commissioner to say, hang on a minute, what's going on here? It needs to be sorted out. So I really, really would urge you to challenge the Regional Schools Commissioner about why he is setting his bar so low, and why, when you have a situation where we do have a difference in achievement and attainment across our secondary schools, he lets the ones that are doing less well continue to do less well.
Do you meet with him as a borough frequently?
I haven't met with him.
We
do.
meet
I
with
do,
him.
yes.
Has that question been asked of him?
Yes. We don't seem to see as much of him these days because the machinery is growing on the regional schools commissioner side. So over the last year it's tended to be more his representatives.
And this is the issue. Yeah, and I think this is the issue with school improvement, is that when you take it so far away from the local setting and you take the challenge, you put it in Whitehall, you put it in the hands of a few people, it means that they only ever pick up the schools that are at real crisis, that are really failing. We don't have those schools in Southwark, but that means that those schools that really do deserve proper, challenge and holding to account, I don't think that it's happening.
Regarding the improvement part of the school improvement part of the borough, obviously it's not being funded, but the borough will be funding that. Do you think there will be a good uptake from schools into Southwark school improvement services?
Well, sorry, do you want,
No, I've got something from that.
Nina might be able to feedback on where we are in terms of kind of expressions of interest, people signing up at the moment. I think there is a challenge for us that we pitch what we're offering at the right level for schools, that we make sure it is what they want and it is something that they are willing to pay for. But at the moment, there is a substantial contribution still coming from the local authority. It's not coming from ESG. It is coming from kind of core council revenue, because we're absolutely committed to making sure that we do still have a school improvement service here. But there's a challenge to us as we move from the current situation to kind of selling ourselves we need to make sure that we are absolutely on the board in terms of kind of professionalism and kind of changing the way that we market that service. So that there's a good challenge that I think you should be making to Nina and her team, but maybe she can.
Actually, I had a supplementary on that. Thanks for raising those questions. Have you finished now?
No, I do want it right at the end. You can.
Oh, right. I just wanted, just on the new model, what is in it for the different schools? How will they benefit? Do you know what I mean? This is part of the pitch, really, because I was trying to think, in our time of scrutinising over the last 4 years, it feels that the schools want different things. Do you know what I mean? And I just wondered how we would get, with so many different tenures and, how we would get away from a one-size-fits-all. But what would be the benefit?
But we don't have a one-size-fits-all model at the moment. Our service is already tailored to the needs of different schools, and some schools will need greater support than other schools, and there will be a range of things that you will get for. Not for free, but you'll get from the core service. But there will be a range of additional things that you could buy. But so Nina will probably be worth.
Shall I just explain?
I just wanted to say, if you were Harris, and I remember that time he came along, and basically Harris represents it, but they were very much, when I asked, why don't you interact with any of the schools, and it was like they were too busy and they felt that people wasted time.
But
so
Harris don't use our school improvement service at the moment.
Okay.
They could choose to buy it as an academy, but they don't benefit from it at the moment because they're not a maintained school.
But if we had a new thing, presumably we would want everyone to sign up to it.
Well, they could sign up. They could, academies. We do work for, or have done work for, academy chains that have approached the school improvement team. So that offer is already on the table. The priority for me. With the new service, and then I'll let you come in, would be our maintained schools, because they are the ones who depend on this service right now. But absolutely there is a challenge that if we have a good service, then we should be marketing it beyond our maintained schools.
Because it wouldn't make sense to pitch something that's a commodity that's dwindling when there's things growing up around it. That just doesn't seem the right, very good business. Do you see what I mean?
Well, The first thing I would say that certainly since my time as director, we've never made any distinction between maintained schools or academies.
Okay.
To me, they are all children in our schools in Southwark. So any school that asks for support or requires a challenge will get it. Now, the only thing that's changing in terms of getting the support in any other area other than if there's a safeguarding issue, because that's just that's what we deal with.
Universal,
the only difference now is that schools will be buying that service from us.
Yes, yes.
And we've spent a year consulting with our primary schools, because it's aimed at primary. This is certainly to begin with, and that's where a large bulk of maintained schools are. And we know that the secondary academies have their own systems for school improvement. But it's targeted at primary schools. We've consulted with groups of head teachers, primary head teachers, right across the board.
Okay.
As I say, early years, nurseries, academies, maintained, all of them. And we spent a year working with our head teachers and senior leaders to work through with them what kinds of school improvement they need, and how that might best be provided. So we have constructed an offer based on our consultation. We're going through this stage at the moment of having consulted and constructed that offer, we then met on a one-to-one with each of those schools, so the officer team met with each of those schools to work out a bespoke programme and how that offer might work for
individual schools.
For individual schools. So now we've just recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks started the sign up to that offer. Now at every stage of the way, and we won't know until we get signatures on the dotted line, but at every stage of the way we've had a very positive indication of a high buy-in.
And how much are we charging, or do you want what to say here? It's up to you.
To be honest with you, I can't remember off the top of my head. I would have to go and look that up, but I can get that to you. But it is an offer. In terms of how we financially pitched it, is that the schools will not be paying any more for a school improvement service than they have in previous years.
So last year the schools agreed to take a top slice off the DSG to give to the council for because we'd lost part of the ESG grant. So they agreed to a top slice that topped up the ESG last year. So in effect, they are now going to pay that same contribution direct from their budgets. So for this year, the schools should not be financially worse off than they were last year.
Okay.
Would that be fair to say? But the challenge for us is that I think realistically, unless something very surprising happens with kind of central government grant or kind of DSG, ESG funding, then we will have to move to a model where the council contribution decreases and the school contribution increases.
Okay, I understand. It just sounds good. You know, it sounds like it's got a good business case and attractive to schools, as it should be. I suppose one of the things, because I'm very keen, you know, that we keep this link with schools, I don't feel it's going to be forever, you know, that we'll have people in charge that think it's a bad idea to have local authorities and schools together. But, you know, I think, you know, I would prefer, you know, that it was across the board and for secondary, because it's interesting.
But
because
I'm
just
totally
saying.
happy with that. But we've had a situation whereby the ESG was specifically used for maintained schools, and that is the slice of funding that we've effectively lost. And the ESG, if you're an academy school, that was straight to you, and you had already made a choice about whether, you know, who you bought these services from. So absolutely, there's a right and proper challenge that if we are serious about this service being excellent, if we are serious that this is a service that our maintained schools buy into, then why wouldn't we want every single Southwark school to think this is a good service?
And also secondary, because quite often, you know, the children that are struggling, it's that transition. The parents find it hard to interact with the secondary you know, compared to the primary. But I do have another question on that, if I may, and that is about grant-maintained schools. There's been much in the news about grant-maintained schools and accountability, and that the government proposed that parent governors can be ousted. And if you're asked to leave a school governing body, you're not allowed to reapply for another 5 years, and this just doesn't sound very democratic to me. So I'm just wondering how we can encourage, in grant-maintained schools, how we can encourage parent participation and a school leadership level, really.
Grant maintained, you mean?
There aren't many grant maintained.
Yeah, you mean academies effectively
Yeah,
now? Or?
Well, my understanding it was...
There aren't grant maintained
I don't
schools.
think
Yeah.
Well,
much grant.
in Southwark, we've got mostly local authority
Yes.
maintained
Sorry.
or
Academies.
academies.
Yeah.
So it won't
So there was a time where there were a number of grant maintained, but they're sort of...
They became.
But what about the parents? So this won't apply to them at all?
Well, I think the issue that you would have, I mean, if you're a local authority school, there will be requirements around parent governors. Nina will be better to tell me to
Yeah,
say
there are
it.
instruments of governance which set out the guidance on...
Yeah, we did a scrutiny.
Yeah.
It's very similar, that they had to be elected.
But
and then,
the challenge you have around academies will be, I think it's less of an issue when you have standalone academies. It's probably more an issue when you have maths, in that most maths will be structured with one governing body across their schools, and there might only be potentially one elected parent governor on that board. There might not even be, I don't even know what the requirements are, and then the schools themselves individually will only have advisory boards, and a lot of the big decisions will sit with your kind of your MAT governing body, which could feel very disconnected from your local advisory boards. On the other hand, I would say that if you run a group of schools, like we run a group of schools, in terms of the kind of the finance, the HR, the maintenance of your premises, actually there are some big things that you can more effectively do across your schools, and those decisions are often not what the parents wanted to get on a governing body for. So there might be scope that if your advisory board is much more focused on curriculum, is much more focused on safeguarding, is maybe focused on SEND and inclusion, actually there might be greater scope for your advisory board to discuss the things that really interest you and that you want to change about your school as a parent. But I think it's kind of less a question for us, if that makes sense.
are there any more on this governing question? Because I have some more. No. I mean, I did, just before we end this part, some of my constituents did actually come to me about the process of Dog Kennel Hill's transition to hard federation, and I haven't been able to, unless I've missed it, I haven't been able to respond really. And my constituents have said that they've had freedom of information questions that have gone unanswered really. So I just wondered if you could shed any light on any of that?
Well, certainly the freedom of information responses, I think, went back to them before Christmas, and we can double check. I think we did a relatively good exercise before Christmas to make sure that queries had all been responded to. I don't want to say for certain. I'm happy to go back and check. But we did, for the freedom of information requests. I'm happy to go back, but certainly I sent the things that we get as cabinet members. We get sent the request and we send it back, and that was certainly done from the cabinet office, from myself and Councillor John, and I think you will have had them as well, and they've been sent.
We had quite a number that...
Yeah.
Neela, can someone just action from here to just go back and find, because I have submitted something to members' inquiries, to yourself, to you, and I've not been able to answer it yet, and I'm still being lobbied for it. So if that could be looked at, that would be great. I'm sure it might be the same as the freedom of information questions, but it just looks like a number of my constituents have still got more questions than answers, or I think they have. So if we can move that on, that would be really appreciated. Okay, that's on the schools from me. Have you finished your?
I have one thing about special schools.
Mm-hmm.
Are we, as a borough, supplying sufficient spaces of the right type?
Nina might be better on the second bit of that. I would say that at the moment, no, we're not supplying sufficient spaces, and the result of that means that we are paying for more expensive provision outside of Southwark. But we do have a really kind of a much clearer capital kind of strategy around our SEND places. We do school place planning every year. For the last 2 years, it's had a really kind of clear commitment and strategy around SEND places, and we are now starting to see the delivery of more places. So the new Cherry Garden School, the build there finishes in July. There will be, I can't off the top of my head, I don't know what the increase of places is, but you get nursery places as well. There will be a new, bigger Beermond School. There will be the brand new Camberwell Spa School, which is an entirely new provision. I think there's over 70 places there, which will be a specific, autism specialist school. And there's certainly enough statistics to back up that we do need that kind of SEND provision. Resource base at Cola, yes, okay, I was talking about that at Cola Governors last night, which is a big investment as well, yeah. So we are definitely doing, we definitely have a programme of expansion and delivering more places. I don't know whether...
I think I would just add to that also Southwark provides the schools for inpatient children at Camberwell and at the Bethlehem Hospital. We're really proud of those schools because they're Ofsted rated as outstanding, and the average stay for children in those very acute phases is 6 months. So 6 months is a long time unless you're getting good education. And I really want to kind of call out that for some folk with disabilities, particularly if that mental health crisis happened very early on, it becomes a disability because it runs for many, many years. And so we've got an enormously wide range from eating disorder through to schizophrenia through to psychosis, a really wide range of quite specialist and niche challenges and disabilities, as well as the more common range of disabilities. And so it's right that we have a strategy that looks to do more of that in Borough. We want to have more of that in Borough and be investing our money in Borough. And the grit that we put into this discussion is the challenge around inclusion. That actually we should always keep alive the challenge of local kids going to a local school. And wherever we can support that to happen, we should, because part of education for children is growing up with their peers. And we've got some really good outcomes from our special schools, particularly around into employment and travel training, as well as academic qualifications. So we've got some really good outcomes. And I always like to reintroduce the challenge whenever we're looking at this strategically around. So, are we sure we're getting it right for David, for Nina? Are we sure we're getting it right for each and every child? Because sometimes in the discussions, folk, families or schools can lose sight of the fact that inclusion is very, very, very important. And I'd hope to see as much effort and support in resource centres and in specialist support in schools to help kids go to a local school with their friends, as I would about the great developments like Spy Camberwell and the other schools that locally.
Yeah,
so it's a mix.
I mean, I think there's a big challenge at secondary. What's interesting, I think, about SPA, we've got to make it happen yet, is that it will be an all-through school. And one of the things that I hear anecdotally is the big challenge of transition, and that actually children who have been in mainstream school, who have been well supported, suddenly finding themselves, either just very lost or at crisis once they make that transition to year 7. So I think there's something really exciting about Camberwell Spa being all through, and I think there's also something really, really good about the resource base at Cola, and making sure that offer at secondary, whether it's in a special school or whether it's in mainstream, is strengthened.
Okay, Sam, you're just supplemental on this. Sorry.
So earlier you spoke about kind of the progress that is being made across education in terms of achievement. I was wondering if you could touch on SEN achievement and whether that same progress occurs for those pupils as well, or if there's, if it's not happening, what are the challenges and what do we need to do to get that level of progress at matching other pupils?
I think our figures are good, but you've probably got more tips.
So I can share more specific data with you, but the headlines are that our SEND children overall, as a group of SEND, and that's very difficult because there are so many complexities. No children in any way are alike anyway, but in terms of need, but the overall average figures for us are that those children achieve well and make good progress compared to their peers.
Can I just ask about Newlands? How is that functioning now? Because it went through a very rocky patch, did it?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
And is that you've finished after that? Yeah. Okay, good.
Well, I'm satisfied with the improvements that have been made at Newlands. I think there's a great head teacher there, Maria Rodriguez.
It's still a trust though, isn't it?
It's an academy, yes. Okay. And we have a close relationship with Newlands. In fact, I shall be going there fairly soon. And I think Maria's been there just a couple of years now, almost a couple of years, and there's been a difference, a significant positive difference.
Okay, excellent. Right, so Rosie, you're next.
Thanks. So I've got about 3 questions, all on quite different issues, I guess, but hopefully they'll come together. So firstly, I wanted to ask, obviously we've talked a little bit about education funding, but I wanted to ask specifically in relation to FE, sixth forms and colleges. Obviously you'll be well aware that kind of almost, FE has been hit almost particularly hard in amongst all the various challenges to education budgets in the last couple of years. And I wanted to ask if you've been, basically what, if any, concerns you have about future FE provision kind of in and around Southwark, if you're having a lot of conversations with sixth forms and colleges, and what I suppose if you see any kind of particular changes to provision in and around Southwark in the next few years, particularly linked to funding pressures, but really related to anything else as well.
Well, I think in terms of Lewisham Southwark College, I think they have made good progress, but I think it's been slow progress. We didn't think Newcastle Group was the right solution for them, and I am now. I do think it's a good time to call them in and ask what their plans are with a change of leadership, and I know that Johnson would be the right person to make sure that they are being challenged about what their vision is for both Southwark and Lewisham learners going forward. I don't know whether it's worth speaking about Passmore.
Yeah, Passmore.
Which is more.
It's more Johnson. Okay, well, can you do a little bit?
Yes, I can do.
You do skill strategy, I'll do Passmore.
Okay,
Just
right. So it's a very timely question, and there are lots of challenges around FE, and I'm going to include in that as well adult and community learning, because for me education is a continuum, and you should have an opportunity at any stage of your life to pick that up or to extend that. So there have been a number of reviews nationally around FE provision, and there are going to be changes to how that's funded. And one thing we can probably rely on is that there'll be less money. So we're not letting that put us off. We've spent almost a year now working on our Southwark skills strategy, because we know this is an area that we need to develop. We've got something in the region of 60,000 children and young people in our schools, and they do very well at every key stage in those schools. So for those 16-year-olds who don't want to stay on and do A-levels at this point in their lives, we do need to have a range of provision and options for them. So this is very much what the skills strategy is about. So it's what are the options. David will talk about Passmore in a moment, which is one initiative that we've developed with London Southbank University. And the skills strategy is very much looking at how we can develop those options further. And some of the challenges around that is that there is no national or local database that captures what the desires of these young people are, where they're going, what they're wanting. So that's quite difficult to capture in terms of what is it then that we provide and signpost. And whatever that is, it's not going to capture the interests and the needs of all of those post-16 people, because we can't deliver on everything. So right now we're going through a process of trying to work out what it is, what is the exact provision that we need in borough.
Okay.
And we think that the changes in recent years, government policy changes, and indeed some providers, to call it out straight, have really let our young people down. I think it's very hard, if you wish to pursue a vocational path, to land in a good place and then hopefully a job if you don't have great careers guidance and support. And the changes in that space have really let a lot of folk down. So as part of that skills strategy, we wanted to look at how we can strongly enhance, regardless of who the providers are, and we've been backing a number rather than just one, because we felt we needed to spread our bet on it, and really commit around different strengths of the strategy. Who's good at construction, who's good at the hospitality sector, who's good at the various jobs that are around, and making sure that if we were going to be promoting apprenticeships or academic training, vocational training, that it was in places where people were genuinely likely to get decent jobs and to enjoy their future. So we've been working with London Southwark University and have been challenged by our cabinet members, both Councillor Situ and Councillor Mills, to look at how we address those gaps. And one of the key investments that the cabinet made was a £5 million investment in the Passmore Centre, which is owned by London Southwark University, a beautiful old library building down near the campus, but very kind of derelict and needing a lot of money. And very skillfully, I think, the trade-off for that investment is stunning careers advice and guidance for anyone in the borough who wants it. So that can be our go-to place when someone's having a conversation with a teacher or head teacher or parent about, I don't want to stay on and do my A-levels, where do I go? Well, here's where you go, and you get something that youngsters used to get in the past, which was some really good bespoke, really helpful careers advice and guidance, and then a gateway into a whole range of degree apprenticeships and apprenticeships, with starting at very basic levels, but with exit points at every stage. So if you just need to do a little to find out, test it out that that's the career you want to do, and then go on to do some more vocational training or apprenticeship, then you go and do that. But also keeping aspirations still high and challenging people and saying, well, what about if you push yourself a little bit further? You might end up in an even better job. And what about trying out different vocations that are maybe not typical for young men, young women? Why not just take this opportunity safely to try that out? So really, really, really pleased that that's all signed, sealed and agreed by both LSBU and the Council as part of our strategy, and we've committed an investment of £5 million.
But there were target numbers for
2000. 2000.
Yeah.
We were quite demanding, and it did obviously take a bit of time to get the agreements. But in order to kind of match with the aspirations the administration has driven through in recent years around apprenticeships and employment, we put a value on that £5 million investment and said we want 2,000 young people in this borough to progress beyond careers advice and guidance and into a pathway that gets them a job. So that's what LSBU will have to deliver to pay back that significant investment, and we're confident they will.
Okay, that's good to know.
That actually leads very neatly into my next question, and you may have in fact partly answered it, but I was going to ask about the impact of the apprenticeship levy on businesses in Southwark. Obviously, nationally there's been quite a few concerns raised about the impact it's having on the ability of small and medium-sized businesses particularly to offer apprenticeships. I just wondered if you are able to say anything about, I suppose, whether you've seen any kind of fall in number of apprenticeships being offered, or the variety of apprenticeships being offered in Southwark, and what, if anything, the council can do to work with SMEs in particular, but also obviously the people looking to take up apprenticeships, to ensure that that those opportunities are still offered.
I think you've definitely strayed very much into Johnson rather than me, so I don't know whether David or Nina.
I wouldn't want to answer that confidently.
We
can take it away and
ask it.
no. Well, I mean, I don't know if Johnson's due to come, but we can definitely get you a written response.
We've actually exposed something because this leads on to a question which I was going to ask Johnson, but I think I might leave it with you, trusted trio, and that is, I keep asking how many children, care leavers, have got apprenticeships, and I'm told that we'll collect that data, but I've been asking it for 3 years now, so maybe it will come because it's taken me 3 years to get across.
But you're doing care leavers next, aren't you?
No, we are, but this is, I want to ask you three, really. Not that I don't trust anyone else, but basically I would like to get that because I think our aspiration must be, that care leavers get either an education place or an apprenticeship. And I think that is a fit aspiration, but we need to have the data.
I don't know whether I can, I'm happy to take that away and to make sure that we try and get that. The latest virtual head teacher report is coming to the next corporate parenting meeting, and it definitely has really, really strong stats on our care leavers going into employment, our care leavers going into higher education,
and apprenticeships.
But I don't know off the top of my head, it might not. But let's, if it's not in there, let's, I take it away that we will endeavour to get it. And if there's a reason why we can't get it, we will tell you.
Or just find a way. I mean, I can't believe there isn't a way now. I know that care leavers will say, I want to be treated like everyone else, but actually, there is a way of collecting this information which is non-intrusive.
We're clearly collecting how many are going on to higher education. So, we can certainly, I'm sure we can collect it.
Councillor Mills, if anyone can do it, I'm sure you can do it. So I'll leave that with you. Now, where are we up to now? Have you finished?
Yes, I have.
Have you?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, I had 2 pages of questions, but I will be nice and I'll only ask 2. So I wouldn't be me if I didn't ask about youth violence and education, kind of how that crossover works. So first of all, just want to say that the Southwark Youth Service is really, really good in my opinion, and it does absolutely brilliant work. So if you can feed that back, I'm really impressed by what they do and some of the kind of innovations and kind of tools that they use to kind of penetrate some of the kind of things that are going on. However, some of our schools are not very keen on acknowledging that they have a problem, and I think that's kind of part of the issue. You have some schools who are quite keen to engage in the issue, and I know we'll pick this part a bit more in the event in March. But I guess what I wanted to know is, from kind of your experience, what is that relationship between kind of intervention and prevention services and the schools in the borough, and what are the biggest challenges, do you think? Because obviously you said knife crime is probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing as a borough, and I think most people would agree. So what do you think?
So I think it would be something. I presume you have your Jenny Brennan coming to your event, but the YOS service, I've talked about the Ofsted of Children's Services, but the YOS get inspected in a slightly different way. You don't really get a rating, but the assessment that was done at the end of 2016 was fairly stunning, and this is a service that is funded far beyond the statutory requirements of the council. Now, of course, I'm setting the bar very low when I say that, but this is a service that we have absolutely protected, and that is the case again this year. And that's a very, very big financial commitment that we make, because we know that the work that they do is good, is important, and because we don't want to do the statutory minimum, we do want to do the work with those people who are on the edge of being drawn into criminal behaviour and violent behaviour. So I think that's really important. Since the Knife Crime Action Plan the strategy was agreed last July, actually the really strong bit that I take away out of that in terms of actions actually happening is, I think, the work of YOS, the work that they have done, whether it's kind of recruiting their peer navigators, you know, those young people that they are particularly working with. I mean, it might be that David or Alistair can speak more about that, but also the work that they are already delivering in their schools. I think they've done 2 slightly different programmes. One's been delivered in 9 schools, one's been delivered in 11. So actually, I think, you know, I take your point that some schools are more open and forthcoming. They want to be engaged. They acknowledge that there is a challenge there and that they want to take it on. But actually, I think YOS is getting into a lot of schools and delivering really, really strong preventative work. Now, the fact that, you know, I always think we write these wonderful strategies and then they kind of disappear off to a shelf and there's never an action plan, but actually there is. And I think the one thing that really, really strongly comes out of being delivering it is that work that is going on already in schools. But I don't know whether David wants to.
Yeah, I think there's a truth in what you're saying, and that's borne out in serious case reviews, and it's borne out in incidents, and it's borne out across London. That sensitive to reputation, some schools will try to deal with issues and not ask for help. And some schools, not many thankfully, but some schools will want to move the problem child as they see them on, and that definitely causes a delay. So our youth offending service is working with about 500 young people. Only about 20% of them have contact with social care, and most of those children do not. So it's not that it's too late. I don't want to say, you know, by the time YOS are involved it's too late. It's not too late, but it's quite late. And I think there's a truth and a challenge in what you said, which is about prevention and early help and support, and helping people before they get quite far into the risk and the fear, you know, why young people carrying knives. Really, really challenging, really troubling. And I do think there's more that schools can do, and we look to help them to do that. You know, we're challenging and we're calling it out, but we're also asking about how we can help it. And the programmes that Councillor Mills mentioned are one way of doing that. Separately, but very powerfully connected with this, is the work that we're doing in parenting classes. So, you know, Councillor Mills and I go to the graduations of some of those parenting classes. The numbers are very high. The reach of that through social care is very high. And for some of those teenagers who are, and their parents who are struggling to deal with changes at home, wanting to know how to helpfully put some boundaries around in an effective way, I can certainly think of several cases where doing a parenting group, and we also run a parenting group for dads, just for dads, in the last year.
Is that kind of referrals from social care, or is that
if
they ask for help?
It's a folk ask for help. It's not just from social care. So it can also be, you know, someone saying I'm concerned, I need help, and through functional family therapy, and a number of different routes. And certainly the one we did just for dads was very, very timely, and that was not people asking for help, but people being told you might benefit from some help. And the mix of people, you see it when you're at those. It's really powerful, because we have a meal with parents and their children, and they come and they celebrate the fact that their parents are going to graduate from a parenting course to help them be the best parents they can be. It's really, really, really powerful, really moving. And we were looking at figures earlier today about the reach around events and training that we've been offering. It's very, very wide. So I'd kind of just want to flag up that, as well as the 500 kids with YOS, as well as the work we're doing with schools, there's another bit of activity happening over here, which is trying to tackle this issue by supporting parents. And I am always blown away by when you get some one-to-one time or group time with parents, and you can let down those barriers and talk about how does it feel for you at night when your kid goes out the door and you don't know where they're going, and when they come back, how do you have that conversation? And the really skillful work by colleagues in running those evidence-based programs. You know, we don't take a punt on it. We use the programs that we know really make a difference. And we don't give up on people. Some people do the course a few times because actually they need to get their head around it. So I think it was continuing to invest in those programs, and doing them at times that work for dads and mums, and doing a variety of programs. That's also having quite a powerful effect. And I think in the round we just need to have a stock take about what's the optimum level of our support and intervention to make a difference, because it is a big challenge that we face.
Yeah,
So it's
and
very,
you
very
know,
real.
I think the scrutiny is really timely, really important. There needs to be a stock take at both the safeguarding boards about kind of where we are on the action plan. But you know, if we have done good things since last June or July, then you know we should be doing them at kind of, you know, we need to find the money to do more of them. So I think the kind of the peer navigators program, I think you know it sounds like that's really good, but it's not reached very many people yet. So how can we, if that is working well, if that is really closely engaging with, I mean I think it's been all young men, and how can we do that at greater scale?
Okay. Do you have any follow-up? I'm changing the subject.
Yes, just that in the process of organising the event, Julie and I met with the Youth Council, and that was quite interesting, because at first they said that they weren't impressed with what they'd seen, but then when they spoke, they were quite animated. So I think that will make for quite a good, you know, some energy on the day, really. The other thing that I wanted to say was also on the other end, really, the restorative thing, because it's such a shock and everything's focused on the prevention. But what happens to that life when, you know, through the judicial system, once you've been involved in that? So.
And I would encourage you, the Youth Council, really important, and I know it was one of their top concerns.
Yes, so that's why they were.
But change makers, and whether any of peer navigators, whether there is any scope for those young people to come along, because I think young people have got a range of different experiences, and it would be good to hear from.
Thank you. It would be great to see you there if you can make it. Really good. I mean, I can give you a slot, maybe.
I don't know, because I am definitely not the expert on this at all. But
it'd be good for you to say a few words as a lead member, obviously. Okay.
Yeah, I've got one more question, and it's a completely different subject. Just for context, I used to work for a domestic abuse charity, and now I work in children's services kind of transformation. So, as I'm sure you all know, domestic abuse is the most prevalent factor in terms of children going into local authority care. So I was wondering, what is kind of our strategy around kind of early intervention in terms of domestic abuse and children, because obviously there's some great work going on, this Barry's brief, but great work going on with the parents, and even some work going on with the perpetrators. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know, especially, you know, when that first phone call is made, because there are schemes across the country where, you know, if there's a child witnesses, or is in a house actually, didn't have to witness, house of domestic abuse, the next day the school will know by 9 o'clock in the morning, so they know kind of to offer that wraparound support in case that child needs it. And I was just wondering if we have anything similar here in Southwark, or if we've considered anything similar, or what if we don't have that, you know, what's our alternative thing to offer?
David, might be your man now. What I would say is that, you know, we had the domestic abuse strategy was initially agreed, was it 2012? But you know, and it was a good kind of starting point. But I think we all acknowledge that not only does it need a refresh because it's quite old, but it needs a refresh because we need to take, you know, we need to do kind of bolder things. We need to do more things than we committed to. So I think this is, you know, kind of really timely that there might be new things that we should be looking at. But I don't know whether you can speak.
It's an area we've looked at very intensely, actually. So we had a joint session of both safeguarding boards just on domestic abuse. That was the only agenda item, and we had massive turnout by our partners, so we could look at how effective our current strategy has been. So we've been spending a fair bit of money on a range of different services, some of which have been very effective. Many have been embedded in our MASH, our safeguarding hub, and also open access. And then at the other end of the spectrum, for our PAUSE project, a big feature of the women who undertake the PAUSE project is domestic abuse. I'm struck that, you know, today we have 72,000 children in care in this country, and for many of them, domestic abuse is a key feature of why they've ended up in care. And when I look at practice elsewhere in the world, there are very different approaches being taken to tackling this issue. So one of the areas I've been very, very keen to take the learning from, because there are more evaluations coming from it and share it with colleagues here, has been the Netherlands, where there's been a public health approach to tackling domestic abuse. And it's a proper, robust public health approach to tackling domestic abuse. Recognising that if you just try and deal with it in the judicial space, or you just try and do it in the care space, you're not dealing with the underlying issues. And so we've tried to mirror some of that in our recent initiatives. So what you will see over the last year in our policy and our practice has been a shift towards getting perpetrators to face their issues. And so our strategy shifted from just kind of rescue and support for victims and trying to support folk who've experienced domestic abuse in situ and to feel really safe in situ, because moving a victim, typically women and children, but not always, but moving a victim out of that situation is disruptive to education, doesn't necessarily instill a sense of safety. Refuge is not a normal space to live and grow up in. So the more that we've been able to do, working with the Fire Brigade, working with our partners, working with housing, to support victims in situ, that's definitely a change in tack over the last year. And then a focus on challenging and supporting perpetrators to deal with the issues and to use the new powers that the police have for short-term and medium-term protection around that. So we've been very honest in our multi-agency discussion at both partnership boards about people sharing their views on how effective the various services that we've commissioned have been. Some have been highly valued, and that tallies with the audits we've done where we can see the impact. Some have been less highly valued and didn't quite hit the mark, or to be straight with you, maybe they didn't stick with folk long enough. They kind of gave up at a certain point and said, oh, you might not be ready for help now, but actually we don't give up on people. That's not what we're about. We maintain relationships. So we've been able to feed that back to the various providers that we fund and to say, okay, so how can we reshape this? We've also taken an approach where, in shifting our policy from to extracting people and making them safe in another place, we've been having the conversations with the same providers about what can they do to help us keep people safe in situ and to work with perpetrators in a different place.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's actually been a very skillful approach, I think, by colleagues in community safety, because they haven't then alienated those providers that we're just going to stop giving them money and give it to someone else, because actually those providers have the expertise and the experience, and they might just need help developing different strategies. So we've got some follow-up work happening after the joint boards that we had very recently, and it's very much a priority for us to shift that policy in the direction you're saying.
So I think kind of very much work in progress, but it's something that, whether it's this committee, but I don't know whether it's jointly with the health committee, might look at in the next year when there's more stuff on paper. But I was at the joint boards. I'm not quite answering your question, but there was I sat with people.
Community safety.
Okay. It might be worth doing a kind of joint look at kind of the draft strategy or draft themes around that. I sat with public health colleagues at the group, and I also sat with some people who work in our economic wellbeing team here at the council. And we had really good discussions about the fact actually it's expensive, but we have quite a robust alcohol and substance misuse programme, and how are we kind of using that resource to think, for those colleagues to be thinking about domestic abuse and how alcohol might be triggering that, or how they might be able to identify people who might be reaching crisis point. And equally, we know that losing a job can be a trigger for domestic abuse, but equally finding a job and getting yourself back on your feet might be a way for you to make a really positive change in your life. But how are we making sure that actually a really kind of robust kind of economic well-being strategy, and the really, really good work that I think we do to support people back into employment, how are we using those bits of the council to kind of think about some of the challenges that we face around domestic abuse?
I guess just to quickly be aware, I guess my question is more as well about like education specifically. So I had a case which wasn't actually my case because of anyway, but I had a case, and the victim had no recourse to public funds, and so she fled with her 2 children who went to school in Walworth, and she stayed in Hounslow overnight. But because she stayed somewhere else overnight, she was now the problem of Hounslow, not Southwark Council, despite the fact that her children and her worldly possessions, everything she has, she knows is Southwark. And so she actually slept in McDonald's overnight on Walworth Road 24 hours and had to go to A&E in the morning to get her children showered before school. Those children then went to school the next day because the domestic abuse service was being passed from one team to another because the parent had no recourse to public funds. My concern was that without even that mess of who was responsible for her and her children, was that the perpetrator of this crime knew that those children went to school there, and so those children were quite at risk actually on going back to school, but she had no other choice because she couldn't just stay in Walworth McDonald's all day. And so what I really want to know is what is kind of the link between education services and the domestic abuse services, and local schools really knowing about their children.
We do have good links. So essentially through the MASH and through our locality teams, we do have good links. But I don't want to give you a sense. You know this well. There are extra layers of really serious, challenging crisis that can hit a family just in the circumstances you've raised, and the high number of people with no recourse to public funds who are left in that completely unacceptable status for years and years and years means that actually then when they experience this problem, this challenge, which may have been running on for a long time and just for safety had to get out, exactly as you've said. What it then means is that because their status hasn't been resolved, they're in a really difficult space. And so from our perspective, we're working with someone, we work with schools, we support schools in that situation. I can certainly think of a number of cases where Alistair and I over the last year have worked with head teachers to find a way to address that. But I think just as we're trying to address domestic abuse, I really do think that we have to call out that it's unacceptable for many years for people to be left waiting for determinations on their status.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because it just makes them vulnerable to not just domestic abuse, but to prostitution, to living in all sorts of exploitation, because it makes them vulnerable, and it's something we have to really call out and tackle.
Indeed, thank you for that. Now, I only had one more point to make. It's not a question, but while you're all here, the Foster in England report, I see they've got rid of the name Stocktake now, which is good. That came out, and for my sins I've had to go through it. Now, I know it will be coming to Councillor Mills's committee, which is corporate parenting, but I wondered, as we've got the special session on the 22nd, if we could all get together in the scrutiny just to look at the commissioning elements of that, because it ties back to the scrutiny around placements.
I know I left that scrutiny thinking, they should have asked about commissioning IFAs, not about residential placements. You missed a trick. You missed your opportunity.
I didn't
that
miss
was
a trick.
the difficult question of the night.
Actually, if you would have watched the whole recording, you would have seen that I was trying to raise it in a specific way, but it basically the recommendation didn't get taken. But I will be raising it in the next scrutiny, and we can have a rounded discussion. Not now.
No. But you know, in terms of the, I mean, it's coming to corporate parenting, and I don't know if I can make the meeting on the 22nd. If I can, I will. But you will know that we are what are we calling our commissioning group? But we are eight boroughs.
8 boroughs.
And I think what we're trying to do with commissioning of IFAs does ring true with what is in the report. Sir Martin Neri, do I say? He says, he foresees a system where you maybe have 10 blocks of local authorities, and he is critical of spot purchasing, which is what we do, which is what many local authorities.
Yes, well, this is what I was trying to raise through that. Unfortunately, my amendment my recommendation got shoved for something talking about wider welfare. Right, I just want to have, a discussion on that part of it at the scrutiny, because I think that it will be useful. to
On the
you know,
22nd.
Yes.
I think. I mean, happy to do that, and we can. I think we can tell you where we
we
are
can keep
with
the conversation going at the
I,
Scrutiny.
no,
We
no,
can
no,
do it
I don't necessarily think there's huge amounts of detail. You know, we can share where we are in terms of that work. There's a very, very clear programme, there's a very clear timetable. I had an update this morning on it, coincidentally, but I don't know whether there's, you know, a huge amount to report. But we can certainly share what we are doing already as local
Well, that would be
authority.
really useful, because I think, you know, it got diluted slightly in the part-time ambience of OSC. So it would be good to actually bring that back and have a look at that scrutiny. Okay, thank you very much.
And IROs, we could get rid of IROs. How much would that save us?
That's what the report says. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
They're actually being filmed, and I'd like to say thank you very much for your time, Councillor Mills.
Okay.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you, Nina, and you, David, too. We're going to have a 2-minute comfort break, and then we're going to have the highlight of the evening. Thank you.